So welcome everybody and good afternoon. We're going to give it just one more minute and let people sort of float into the Zoom room before we get started and settled in. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to get started. So good afternoon. I'm Dr. Amy Smith, the Chief Learning Officer of Striderline based in Baltimore. And we are, as many of you know, an alternative credit provider working and partnering with institutions in the higher ed space. So let's do what today's going to look like. Let's run this through. We're going to do a little housekeeping, do a nice little opener, and then introduce the panelists and have a great and fun, lively debate and conversation. So let's open with a little bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded. After the session, for all registrants and including our panelists, we will send a recording out to all of you to replay at your leisure, share with your teams, share widely and broadly, please. So look for that in your inboxes. On the bottom, you'll see the chat and the QA button. For questions that come up while we're talking and discussing, please at any time throw a question in the QA. I will pause as needed and try to get questions into the flow of the conversation. And then for the chat room, chat with each other, talk, introduce each other, have side conversations as needed, but we want this to be formal and informal, informative, and a little bit of fun along the way. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Again, and welcome. We're so glad you're here. So in January, Governor Hochul, she announced a plan to increase student success in the state of New York overall, including streamlining application, transfer, and financial aid processes in higher education. Admitting and adding opportunities for adult learners was another part of that charge, funding minority serving institutions, and closing equity gaps in retention, completion, and job placement. Many other institutions and systems in many other states and across New York specifically are also recognizing that there's work to be done in this area. So ultimately, some are partnering with non-institutional organizations to provide new ways for admission pathways, affordable and flexible course offerings, and other avenues, technologies, and systems to streamline the student's journey and process. Today, we've assembled this incredible team of panelists to discuss the current landscape of higher education, specifically in the state of New York, and how that state can recognize the governor's vision and mission by creating alternative pathways for students. Ideally, we're going to talk through learner provided, what institutions are doing, what initiatives are happening, what they're focusing on and working on, and innovative pathways that these institutions are developing specifically for students. The idea is that when we all add more options for students, it's a win-win for students and for the institution. And ultimately the goal to promote equity in higher education today. So with that setting and context, I'm going to go ahead and let's do a round of introductions. Nan, do you mind if I start with you, please?
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for having us here. So I'm Nan Travers. I'm the director for the Center for Leadership and Credentialing Learning at SUNY Empire State College. I am also the co-lead and the PI for a national U.S. Department of Education IES grant called Credential as You Go, in which we're looking at really shifting the incremental credentialing, looking at the whole credentialing system across the United States, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And why don't I pass it over to Elisa?
Thanks, Nan. Hi, I'm Alyssa Vine. I am the University Director for Credit for Prior Learning in CUNY's central office. I'm very excited to be here today and talk with colleagues and and really get to the, the heart of this conversation. So thank you. And I will pass it to Michael.
Well, I'm Michael Bastian, president of Rockland Community College here in the great state of New York. Very interested in the work of creating seamless pathways that would provide students of all backgrounds the opportunity to succeed. So very excited to participate in today's conversation. And let's pass it to John.
Great, thank you, Michael. My name is John Reel. I'm the Executive Director of Auxiliary Services at the SUNY Polytechnic Institute, located in Utica, or central part of New York State. Auxiliary Services, if you're not familiar, it provides the meals on campus, as well as for commuters, bookstore services, and other ancillary types of services for the benefit of the campus community. So we are here to help with this discussion and from an auxiliary services standpoint. Thank you for having me today.
All right, look at that panel. Oh my God, I'm so excited. We're going to geek out for an hour. It's going to be great. All right, let's start with the first question. So for all of our panelists, Nan, Michael, I might open this up for you to kind of kick us off as you begin to dive into an answer. With the recent focus on student success, the governor that I had previously mentioned, and announced a plan for the SUNY system as well as the state, tell us a bit about your institution, your organizations, how you're actually defining or redefining student success. What's that looking like and meaning to you statewide and as an institution?
Michael, do you want to go first?
Sure. Student success has always been about not simply completion, but by helping students develop the paths that will move them to the lives that they deserve. And so it is defining opportunities and our relentless pursuit of clarity for our students from the time they are in the connecting with the college through their first year experiences and how they make progress in choosing academic programs and proceeding to completion and to move on to the next things that mean so much for them. So we have been very focused on the clarifying elements of the path to move students forward. Nan?
Thank you so much, Michael. And I'm going to come at this just a little bit from to share some data to give a little framing here. Currently in our country, 52% of the adults, which are 25 and older, do not have a college credential. And when we look at that, 1/3 of those, 39 million, have some college and no degree. That works out to about a little bit more than 1 out of every 6 adults in this country do not have a credential. And have, out of those 1 out of 6, have some college. So our systems have not been helping our learners all along. We have to start to really rethink about this, that it's, we do say that learners need different kinds of supports and that, life happens, that there's work, family, these kinds of things. But we have to actually start to really rethink how we are credentialing our learners and how we are actually thinking about student support and student success in order to think about the responsibility that we have for our learners. And so as we start to work with a lot of industry partners, as we're starting to work with a lot of different institutions, we need to really help learners see those pathways that Michael's talking about and being able to understand how they have different ways of coming on and off these pathways and evolving them as they go along. So it really means a lot more work around integrating the kinds of learning that individuals have, whether it's prior learning or learning that they're acquiring while they're at an institution, really thinking about how those relate to the work environment and how learning that's acquired in the work relate back into a credential. And so really we're doing a lot of work around kind of rethinking how we design higher education to meet the needs of the learners even more.
So Nana, it sounds like you're thinking about on and off ramps, and the journey isn't, I want to say the word continuous, even though it's continuous, it's not always constant. Maybe that's a better way to say it. We can have fits and starts as a student and still ultimately reach our goal. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'd like to twist that a little bit.
Please do, please do.
Because we have the tendency of thinking about our learners as though they only learn while they're with us, and as though when they're engaged in other parts of their lives, which they're also learning through, that somehow when they leave us, like somehow they've stepped out, or there's, stops and starts. But that's part of that kind of rethinking even the way that we're talking about this. Our learners are learning all the time. Some of that learning takes place when they're with us in higher education. Some of it takes place in their work environment. Some of it takes place in their personal lives. But they're learning all the time. And so we need to get better at understanding how to recognize that learning, how to assess that learning, how to validate that learning, but also how to connect that learning. We have a tendency to think about the learning that takes place out of our walls almost as though it doesn't exist. And so we leave it to the learner to try to pull that all together. And that's where I see our role in higher education really evolving, where we can help make those connections and help learners, start to see how it all fits together, and not leave it up to them to just make sense of it, and that we are only recognizing what are part of it. We really have to expand how we're recognizing.
But thank you. So what I'm hearing, and and I promise I'm going to pass the ball. This is not the Amy show, I swear. But what I'm hearing also is honor all the learning, and that learning happens in multiple ways and places and spaces and at different times. And so this is connecting all of that learning. So thank you. I needed that clarification. Super helpful. John, Alyssa, I want to pass the question to you as well in terms of how your institution and organization is defining or redefining student success and thinking about it.
Sure. I think at CUNY, there are many different strands of work that are underway in thinking about student success. A lot of focus on broadening academic momentum and the way that we think about the support infrastructures that are in place for students. Work that I've been involved with over the last several years has honed in on ways that we can make CUNY and its colleges specifically more welcoming for adult learners, and to make sure that people who are coming into the university at any point in their lives and careers find the kind of reception and recognition that allows them to succeed on their academic journey, whatever that may look like. And, to Nan's point, I think recognizing that that students do naturally move in and out of their educational trajectories for many different reasons, and not treating that as a strike against them, but rather trying to structure our services and our offerings in ways that that support them no matter where they're at, where they're coming from, where they're going. And we've done a lot of work at CUNY over the last few years to try to really understand and identify barriers that exist in the way that our system works, and to try to dismantle those barriers, and to try and introduce new policies and new practices that will make students who are coming from different pipelines, whether they are incumbent workers that are looking to upskill and move forward in their careers, or people who have never had the opportunity to go to college before but have extensive experience in different areas of the workforce, or people who have some mix of college experience in their background to help them find their way in and make sure that we're supporting them in the ways that they need. One of the ways that that CUNY has made some progress in this way is by instituting a system-wide credit for prior learning policy. And that policy was passed by the Board of Trustees back in 2020, and the implementation work is ongoing. And we have colleges within our system, including the School of Professional Studies. And I think I saw that there's at least one of my colleagues from SPS that's on today. So hello. We have some colleges within the system that are quite established in the way that they're offering credit for prior learning and stackable credentials and different pathways for students coming from different angles. But we're really looking to establish more consistency, more equity, and just broader opportunities for students across all of CUNY's campuses. So I think that we're really thinking of student success as how do we make sure that we're opening doors everywhere we can for all different types of students. And also that we're easing their journey, not just through their current credential or degree path, but also helping them be equipped to transfer those credentials and those credits so that they can go with them wherever they go within the CUNY system and beyond. And I think the beyond is an important part of this conversation as far as sort of the integration of higher education opportunities in the state.
Alyssa, would it be fair then, thank you, would it be fair to link sort of what Nan was saying, that back to that prior learning, like all of the learning for a student? And I'm going to make a summary statement, you push back on me. It sounds like you're also really tackling what we often call in higher ed seamless, to make the journey for a student more seamless and all of those touch points. Is that a correct?
Absolutely. And I think it's you know, the phrase that comes up often is the warm handoff, right? You don't want a students, you know, they have a great interaction with somebody on, you know, at their very first contact, but then as they start to go through the process of getting themselves admitted and registered and onboarded, there's so many opportunities to lose them and to have them feel as though they're not welcome here, they're not college material, they're not. And to try and prevent that from happening by taking some of that legwork off the students and trying to make those processes and experiences for students more seamless, not just on the entryway throughout their journey, but I think, yes, that's definitely an important part of what we're really trying to explore and strengthen.
Perfect. Thank you. And John, I just want to make a little bit of space to see in terms of student success, how your institution is thinking about it, your division, department, how you're thinking about it, or how that definition of student success may be changing. So I want to pause and give you space before we dive into some more questions, please.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. One of the things that I'd like to mention here from an auxiliary standpoint that we try to help in a way of talking student success is, you know, on the course materials front. We just recently went through a change in how we handle our course materials and providing those more through an online system. So we don't have books in the bookstore on campus anymore, which is kind of a contrary model to what we normally have been seeing. But it really, this was our first year. It worked well. It helped with those students that really gave them more flexibility with options where they could shop around their books a little bit, because we know that they're doing that anyway. And part of the reason was also from the affordability standpoint is not having them to wonder if they could afford a book versus, you know, going through a course and not having those materials handy because it was cost prohibitive. So certainly we know that the success of having those right materials is important. In our area here, we wanted to make sure that that was becoming more attainable and reachable for those students who otherwise maybe couldn't afford course materials to be successful. And as far as, you know, even on the dining front, we know that making sure that they're well fed obviously helps play into the proper nourishment and nutrition and helping them to be more successful and making sure that they have what they need to fuel themselves, I will say, so that way here, again, that plays into being successful and not trying to give it more of a well-balanced approach than just the, you know, normal junk food, if you will, which doesn't really help any of us. So we certainly focus on those areas, and we find that, you know, working with students in our office too, there's areas in student government that we assist with that we feel also helps define the student success going forward. You know, Nan mentioned not just within our walls, but going out into the community, and when they get into some jobs, and those that were involved with student government, we assisted them with planning some of their events, looking over contracts, and they got a little flavor for what that was like. If you're either going to look at owning your own business or working as in management or any areas where you have to deal with contracts, those individuals got a little extra learning experience doing those things as well, even if they weren't business majors. So I found there was other ways that we could bring to the table some other learning avenues that, you know, the auxiliary, while we provide these services, we look at other ways that we can help educate, even though we're not on the academic side, because those other learning moments or teachable moments are good for a student's success beyond graduation as well. So as far as from the campus side, I mean, they focus on meeting students where they're at, and trying to be flexible with schedules, location. We have a large commuter population. So a lot of our students are either working full-time or just balancing work-life balances. And then also ensuring that students are ready for jobs of today and tomorrow. We have a unique model that has acted as a magnet to attract globally recognized companies, which then provide exciting career opportunities, such as Wolfspeed. They just opened up right out not far from our campus here in the Marcy Parkway. There's a synergy between Wolfspeed and SUNY Poly. Not only that, but our engineering and nursing programs, for example, along with other STEM-based programs, provide economic and social mobility that lead to exciting and stronger career options. So those are some things from both the auxiliary and the campus side with regards to how we're defining student success.
Thank you, John. I think it's really important to be reminded and that you're bringing it to the table. So it's actually on the table. That is also about tools and materials, and from what we eat or how we spend our time on campus, right? To the activities that we're involved in, to the materials we need for that academic side, in addition to academic programming, right? And all of those. So thank you for being with us today. It's really good to hear that side. Being a former faculty, I can get in my own little head and think it's all about my class, but it takes an entire village, right, to help a student be successful. And so so thank you. I really appreciate that viewpoint.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw out another one, and anybody can open up and start on this one. We hear a lot about pathways, meeting students where they are, making the journey as seamless and as smooth as we possibly can. And then, of course, we've heard from all of you today about honoring all of the learning that a student brings to the table, both previous and prior, current, and of course, into the future. As we think about that entire bucket and relative to student success, how do we really define pathways? What do we mean when we say the word pathway? How are we partnering inside the institution amongst divisions, departments, or teams? And how are we partnering externally, possibly, to build better pathways? Any examples or exemplars or initiatives from any of your institutions would be great to hear about.
Nan, you're on.
I just saw that. Thank you. I'm going to jump in on that one because I'd like to kind of open up with our Credential as You Go project. So this is a national project. We are working right now in 3 states, where New York is one of them. Within New York, we're working with the SUNY system. And it's building on work that initially for me began here within SUNY, where we a few years ago developed a system-wide policy on micro-credentials that has enabled institutions to be much more flexible and responsive to the kinds of credentialing that's needed by the learners and connecting that to employment opportunities. From there, I was able to acquire a Lumina Foundation planning grant, and we did research to look at how and we're terming it incremental credentials because there's a lot of different terminology out there talking about everything from a short term to a full term or a mega and a micro credential when we look at these things, but really trying to get a sense of what's happening across this country. And from that, we developed a framework called Incremental Credentialing Framework that has 6 strategies in it that really help institutions think through how to be very purposeful about designing these pathways and looking at all of the different ways that prior learning, smaller, modularized learning or smaller pieces of learning can be recognized, and also how that connects and stacks into a full pathway. And when we're talking about a learning pathway, we are talking about both the educational part of that and also the employment pathway, and really looking at how those are going together. We have 21 institutions in this project, and so Michael's institution is part of that, as well as 20 other across the 3 states. And we have lots of examples. We've been really impressed with how the institutions are very excited about this. They see it as an incredible opportunity for learners to be able to really start to connect all their learning together and thinking about that longer pathway and how the learning can fit in different ways, and showing the way that that can also lead them to different levels of employment. Most of our projects are working with employers as well. So we really see an integration of the learning that's taking place in higher ed and the learning that's needed for acquiring or going up in further employment. So this is a very exciting project for me, and I think does really address your question in terms of how are we looking at a pathway and how are we thinking about all the different parts of a pathway and how they all come together. For people who want to learn more about that, I encourage you to go to our website, which is called credentialasyogo.org. So thank you.
I'm going to leave space for others to continue with that question and that conversation.
I think it's very important, as Nan was talking about, the intentionality of your institution leaning in to ensure that learners have the most opportunity to gain knowledge, to acquire skills, to translate that knowledge and skills into the credentials that ultimately will lead them to the careers and economic opportunities that they desire is critical. But it also takes institutional leaders within the institution to build that structure of collaboration, to build both academic and non-academic processes, to ensure that students really exist in one college, that you might have many different options within that college, but you should be able to start out in a non-degree program like EMT, and then ultimately work your way into nursing if that's what you want to do, or other areas. And the ability for those who are doing the work in the non-degree space to collaborate and to coordinate with those on the academic side will be critical, because we do see this as a laddering process where you can move from a shorter term credential that you can get academic credit when you've completed that shorter term credential, should you want to go into the credit side, so that you can reduce the cost of going to school and reduce the time to completion, that you can actually accelerate to the career and get that credential of value that will give you the career to provide you and your family that family sustaining and supporting wages. That is the critical idea, but it takes the internal working of folks working together, because we do very well at bureaucracy in higher education, believe it or not. Now, maybe just institutions that I've worked with. We're very, very good at all the rules and all the reasons why we can't do something, or how we should have, but students don't major in bureaucracy. Whether you're in a certificate program, if you're in a 4-year program, a 2-year program, you're not coming there to learn how to navigate complex systems that benefit us as the administration and not the student. So I would say to all of those listening, it is very important within the institution to recognize barriers that are being constructed that keep the non-credit programs from credit programs. Where are the opportunities for stackability? Where are the opportunities to help students really see the possibilities in a career trajectory?
I would just jump in to say that at CUNY we are also starting to explore this area of micro credentials, and that what Michael is talking about is just so critical. I think that we've seen some really great models within CUNY related to a couple of different programs that I can mention, where the continuing education programs and faculty within academic departments are really coming together and working also in close partnership with employers to ensure that the curriculum that's being developed not only will prepare students for the jobs and the skill sets that are needed in the workforce, but also that when the time is right, if the time is right for students to come back into the institution and move into degree programs, that faculty were, it's not a retroactive fit. It's an intentional design that that the micro-credential articulates into the degree program in a way that faculty are already comfortable with because they were instrumental in its creation. So I think that that's just a really important strand of that is connecting the faculty and the instructional designers within the continuing ed space.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So it's a good time for a quick pause. I want to send out a reminder. Q&A is open and you're starting to ask questions. And of course, we've got 4 experts. And so you all can imagine what the questions are coming in. I'm going to read the first question that popped up. It's a great one and it's right in line with this conversation. So bear with me as I read the words. When appealing to adult learners who've taken a break and are now considering returning to continue their education, do all of you have any programs to help them ease that transition? Do you add additional supports, technology, trainings, orientations, etc., targeted specifically for them to help them adjust to an environment that may be very different than the one that they left recently or a few years ago? And I'll let anybody take that one.
I can tell you at Rockland, we've really developed a new division of economic mobility and workforce innovation. And in that division, we are really working hard to get the adult learner, for example, one that has some credits but no degree, or one who has lots of experience that hasn't yet been translated into our ability to give you credit for prior learning. So we've got to figure out how we make sure that those students who are in the non-degree programs, certificates, have the same set of wraparound supports so that they could ultimately transition into the college and be effective, engaged citizens. The key here is that we cannot treat students differently. So we actually, all students get an ID card and they're not, sort of looking different. And all students get to participate in the different services that we have at the college. And we are continuing to develop more systems and of support for the non-degree students so that they too can see themselves at the appropriate time in the credit programs. And after you have your associate degree or your baccalaureate degree, that you want to come back to get another credential that we can offer that might not be offered in these senior colleges. So it's all of that and being very intentional in the design. And the more we stop treating students as different and having different hierarchies, and the more we treat students as students, regardless of the program that you're coming into, the better chance of that experience, particularly for the adult learner, because they can feel engaged. They can feel that they belong. Belonging is one of the main factors that gets people to leave an institution. And that doesn't, whether you're a high school graduate who came in your first semester, or you're a more seasoned citizen who are coming back into an educational institution, if there's not a sense of belonging, if there's not a sense that people care about you, if there's not a sense that you can make it, you're not going to stay. I mean, and that's just what is happening and what we're seeing all around the country in enrollments.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else want to talk explicitly about that transition or what they're doing? I'm happy to pause.
So I just wanted to bring up what really the model that we have here at SUNY Empire State College. Our institution, there's a couple of things about our institution that really is focused on helping with learners in that transition to coming back. And one of it is the idea that it's okay to come back. And as part of that, that you do have knowledge that we recognize as being valuable. So we have an extensive prior learning assessment program. There are all different ways that learners can be assessed for their learning, and having that move into a degree program. And so just to kind of give you a sense of that, our learners, we have a large population of military students. We have individualized prior learning assessment portfolio process. We've got, there's many different ways that learners are recognized. Another part of our model here is what we call a mentoring model. and a little bit more than the typical advisor where you just go in, find out what the next courses you're going to take, and then, you know, you don't see them for another term, but rather that right from day one, the conversation is, you know, what do you already know? What do you want to do? And how do we get you there? And really with the idea of really mentoring a student through the process and helping the student understand you know, from expectations to ways of meeting their goals and the kinds of parts that go with that. And as part of that, it's really important to have the student supports in place. And so we have a model here that is really looking at all of the different services that are available for students and coordinating those services for the students so that you know, they have, you know, everything from an early alert system to if a student needs help with financial aid to any of the kinds of things that are going to really help a student be able to be supported in the process. And behind the scenes, those individuals are connecting with each other and not making the student go from person to person, but that the offices are going back and forth. And so using technology to really help kind of manage what an individual may need and how to really make sure that they're getting the services that they are. And so as we're looking at that, a little more than half of our students are online students before COVID. And now, you know, we're kind of looking at a different story right now, which means even more that all of these things need to happen online. So we have the ability for any learner to be in person or online and be able to make different combinations of how that works for them, which also means that the services are also available in those ways.
Thank you, Nan. I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. All right, I have a couple of the Q&A is lighting up, which is awesome. And I have a couple that I'm going to combine and put together for all of you, anybody on the panel, please. So these are two related questions, both around micro-credentials from our guests, exactly what we're talking about. Can you give some examples of micro-credentials? What are we really talking about? And do they vary in length? Are there actual credentialing agencies that are responsible for content and or testing, in-house build, et cetera? What can that ultimately look like? And then here's the second part of that question. They're very related. What type of funding, if any, are students eligible to receive for credentials that include credit and non-credit? Does the funding model shift for students around credentials, particularly also in the non-credit space? So I'm going to leave you with that bucket of questions for all of you, and anybody can start, whomever would like to.
Well, I know Nan, go right ahead. I know
Okay.
you're ready to go.
Alyssa's like,
Come
I'm
on
going to give it to Nan.
Sorry about this. I don't want to dominate, but
That's right.
I'm living and breathing this. And so, you know, a motto that we have here at our institution is it depends. So there are so many different ways that we can be looking at the incremental credentials. So in SUNY, we actually have policy that defines what a micro-credential is. It can be of all different sizes. In terms of the way that we approach it, it tends to be smaller than a certificate and smaller than a degree. But as we're looking at this nationally, we're seeing all different kinds of combinations on the non-credit, on the credit. We're seeing different funding models for that. These are some of the things that our Credential as You Go project is really looking at, you know, the ways in which these go. There's different policies that are in place, different ways of supporting it. But to give an example of a micro-credential, so for one example would be that in one of our community colleges in the project, they have created 3 micro-credentials that build upon each other. They happen to be in, I'm forgetting the exact title of it, which I apologize, but it's around the mechanics around drones. And so what they've done is they have the first micro-credential, and at the completion of that, people can get jobs in a particular area. But then the second micro-credential adds to that. There's a third micro-credential, so these are stacking on top of it. And then with some general education courses on top of that, then the whole thing stacks into a degree. So we're seeing quite a bit of progress in that way, where we think about that a degree may be too long and too much for a lot of our learners. And so when we see who is and isn't completing a degree, a lot of times people are gaining certain knowledge and then they're going out and working and then coming back and going back and forth that way. But the micro-credential, what it does is it captures kind of a piece of it in its own. It can be a standalone, but it's also stacking into a larger picture, so that it's really a way of not being so degree-centric, where everything is focused around the degree, but really capturing and credentialing what people know.
Let me give you a practical example as well. In our automotive program, we have micro credentials that you can get certain elements of a program, so that maybe you're going to work on brakes, where you're going to work on different elements. Maybe you're going to work on different kinds of electronics within that system. And if you take enough of the credits, you can get a degree, but you can also stop out and go into the world of work with the micro credential on a specific topic. It's very important to recognize that, you think about healthcare right now, there are so many different jobs in healthcare. You don't just, love nurses. We need more nurses, but you don't have to just be a nurse. If you don't get in a nursing program, you don't have to pull your hair out and say, oh my gosh, I didn't get in a nursing program, because there are lots of jobs in the hospital, and there are lots of micro credentials that you can get, so that you can get into the field, and that you can grow and come back and keep moving, and so on and so forth. So, and in terms of funding, while in our state, Governor just talked about the fact that, she's going to help fund some of these programs. Now, they will take time to figure out which programs and who's going to be the sort of arbiter of the quality of the programs and all of those kinds of things. But what is important is that we're still pressing as well the federal government to support the funding of these kinds of programs, because they're not, federally aided at this point as part of financial aid. And without giving people these kind of shorter term credentials that can lead them to good paying jobs so that they can be productive citizens, they don't get the opportunity. The investment, quite frankly, is minimal when you compare the fact that getting people to be out in the world of work, making $50,000, $60,000 to start because they were able to get a shorter term credential, could actually put them in a place where they could afford to come back and get a higher level of education, to earn more money, and to contribute even more to our collective good. So I think that part of this conversation, and what we're trying to do in the state of New York with the work that the governor is saying, that there's value in these credentials, there's value in work in our state, and we've got to give more people a chance, and particularly those from an equity lens who have traditionally been locked out of the opportunities.
So let me follow up with that. Exactly. Thank you, Michael. So a question came in as a follow-up to the micro-credential and funding around equity. Here's the question. Research has shown that students of color have experienced barriers to success, partly because institutions lack understanding in the support that's needed, and also because of historical structural barriers. How are we intentionally addressing their needs, particularly as it relates to micro-credentials?
Well, I think some of the work that we're doing at Rockland, quite frankly, is participating in the REACH approach. And this is Illumina funded work that we are helping to recruit specifically first generation students, those from marginalized and minoritized backgrounds, into the shorter term credentials that lead to family supporting wages. So we don't want to build a bridge to nowhere. We don't want poor people to stay in poverty with academic programs, or get into programs or jobs that they could have had without a program. So we want to make sure that we're working with business and industry and community-based organizations and partners in government, where there are real careers that can pay a family supporting wage, where we can recruit those who have some college but no degree, to give them credit for the things that they did before they, the fact that some dropped out of college, it's not that they dropped out of life. They got jobs, they had opportunities, they built experience, as Nan talked about. So we've got to be able to give them credit where credit is due. and to build in these opportunities. And so when I think about the adult learner and the REACH program specifically, we are specifically targeting those folks who have historically been locked out of opportunities. We are trying to give them access to the educational opportunities and the finances to do this work. And this is why I'm excited about what Governor Hochul is trying to do and helping us to really extend the opportunity where it has not been extended before.
Another thing that we have been looking at, and again, going back to the numbers, when I say that there's 1 out of 6 with some college and no degree, the highest percentage of those with some college and no degree are students of color. And they're also carrying the highest debt load. And so when you're not being recognized for what you know and can do, therefore not getting the jobs that you need and having college debt, that means that you're into a vicious cycle of not being able to pay off that debt in order to get the credential, in order to get the job that's going to be supportive. So we really have to break that cycle. Another thing that has, I would say, has been a critique that's been given to us about the incremental credentials is, are we just creating another system that there's going to be divisions in? And so one of the efforts that we have going also is thinking about auto awarding. And there's some interesting work that's happening in this area. What if everybody, when they reach certain credential levels, are awarded automatically those credentials? You don't have to apply for them. You get them. I mean, you have the knowledge, so the formal recognition should be there too. You shouldn't have to pay back fees in order to be able to be recognized, because otherwise you're treated like you have nothing, which is not true. And so we really need to be thinking about how our policies, how our practices are actually creating barriers for our learners to be recognized for what they know and they can do.
Thank you, Nan. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and ask a question. I've got some questions coming in Q&A. I promise I'll get to them, but I want to open up a little bit for Anissa and John, particularly this targeted question for you. So when we talk about the governor's plan around equity, so many variables and so many things to begin to tackle around that. Alyssa, John, whomever would feel like starting. What's happening at your institution around, again, with respect to equity and around either pathways, student success, adult learners, also what Michael and Nan have just been discussing around micro-credentials. So I want to target, I just want to create space for John, Alyssa, kind of target the two of you and see what sort of thoughts you have around this question.
I can jump in.
Please.
Sure. So, I think that there's a lot of different ways to answer this question, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of work across CUNY that I can't necessarily speak to in detail. But one initiative that I think is noteworthy that CUNY has been involved with is the work of the New York City CEO Jobs Council, and that is a collaboration among some of the biggest employers in New York City who are committed to hiring underrepresented populations into the kind of career tracks that create those life-changing economic trajectories that Michael was referring to. And I think that CUNY's involvement, the CEO Jobs Council is, I think that I don't want to misremember the exact number, but it's tens of thousands of New Yorkers that they're looking to hire who are not coming through the traditional channels of like the top ranked institutions, but they're really looking at CUNY, and they're looking at community colleges, and they're looking at ways of building micro-credential opportunities that will allow the people who participate in these learning opportunities to be skilled and qualified, and also have some of the support infrastructure around preparing resumes, preparing for interviews, having apprenticeship opportunities, different ways that people can break through and begin careers in companies that are known for having incredible career trajectories, but that have not been available to all people. So I think that that's one example that CUNY has been really fortunate to be a part of, and that I think is really exciting for all of New York.
So listen, let me take that exact example that you gave. Thank you. And you talked about beginning careers, et cetera. So here's a great question that came in that dovetails with what you had just said. How important is community buy-in to support your programs like micro-credentials and or mentoring and job placement? That's the first part of the question. And then how do you get community business owners and others to contribute to the success of your students? So Nissa, I'm going to throw that one at you and then open it up for everybody, please.
Sure. So I guess, it seems that there's a real need for like a whole ecosystem around this work, right? Like it's not just about what we can do within a CUNY college. And it's not just what the business community of, huge corporations can do, but it is also about finding those other kinds of partners, the community-based organizations that have real firsthand knowledge and expertise in the populations that their very direct local communities serve within our city, and trying to leverage, I think, their knowledge, their expertise, and their support infrastructure for students or prospective students, to make sure that we are really understanding the needs of the local communities, and in our case across New York City, and making sure that those that we're not that those are pipelines both into the colleges, but also back out into the workforce, and that we're really making the most of those partnership opportunities and learning from their expertise along the way.
Thank you. I want to open that for any other responses along those lines before I ask another question.
Well, it's critical that we learn, if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that we have to work in a much more collaborative way. Everyone is in the reset mode. Business is resetting, industries resetting. Higher ed has to hit the reset button. How we partner as systems, whether it's SUNY or CUNY, how we partner as sectors, whether it's 2-year and 4-year, how we partner with K-12, all of the level of engagement has to change. Because as we've seen, we are much more interconnected. And if we're going to be successful, we have to begin to recognize that how we reset individually in our sectors and systems impacts others and impacts our city and our community. So it's going to be very, very important, as Alyssa was talking about, to make sure that the alignment with actors, and even not insularly. So having conversations with Straighterline, having conversations with other educational actors in the field is something that for some is new, because there's often been suspicion about sectors and systems and even K-12 versus the post-secondary. So we've got to get to the place where the focus is not on our individual institutions or agendas or sectors, but it's got to be on how do we help more folks become learners so that we can be a more educated community, that we can be a more economically viable community, so that we can once again be competitive in the world.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you. All right, I've got a couple more questions I want to get through, and I'm also I'm watching the clock, right? As all good hosts watch the clock. So this is it's a really broad question, but I think it absolutely applies to the conversation we're having. How do you all find and recruit adults? What does that look like for all of you? Again, John, you had mentioned that it's about all students. You had said that very, very forthcomingly in the beginning, but then we also do think about adults, and then Nan, that journey that is fluid, and you had noted. So the question has come up twice. How do we find and recruit adult learners? What does that look like for all of you?
Well, I can tell you, part of what we've been able to do is really partner to get sort of data on adult learners in our service region. And by getting that data with College App and other groups, you can kind of get a sense of where people are and what their interests are and that sort of thing. But also partnering with community-based organizations, very important. Civic associations, very important. And then partnering with each other. You know, the fact is, you know, a student that may start at a four-year institution and have a life path that now makes that no longer sustainable could then be a good prospect for a community college. And that community college person who's now finishing and needs to go and wants to go to the next institution, you know, all of these relationships, as I mentioned just a moment ago, have to be tighter and stronger. And that we've got to be thinking not about ourselves individually or, you know, sector based, but really being much more integrated as a community and sectors, and even within community-based organizations, partners in government and other areas.
I totally agree with Michael, and the point about really thinking about who are all the partners becomes very important. We do quite a bit of work with our industry partners. It's a very strong area for our college, and we connect that directly to the academic programming as well. You know, adults are working, a lot of them. And so, you know, if they don't have a good pathway from work into school and from school into work, then, you know, they do need to work. So it becomes very important. In our framework, we also, one of the areas of the framework is a whole strategy about transfer and thinking about how the incremental credentials can be transferring, not just from you know, a lower level to an upper level, but just as Michael was saying, you know, we need to look at that. This has to be fluid. Our students are fluid. It's our systems that aren't fluid. It's our policies that aren't fluid. And so really to address the adult learner, you know, one is, how are the policies that we have in place really supportive of the adult learner? Many of our policies are designed around specifically a degree-centric perspective and of, you know, the old traditional. And one of the comments, you know, in terms of what COVID has helped us see is that many of our policies, we actually, you know, loosened up, but we got a better perspective of the kinds of policy changes we needed to do. And now I'm seeing institutions almost like a rubber band. Oops, now we got to go back now that they're coming back to in person. And yet the policy changes were really about embracing all learners and their situations. So there's a lot of internal work to make sure that the adult learner, when they get there, is really supported, which also means that the word of mouth gets out there that you're a learner-friendly institution.
Thank you, Nan. John, I see you nodding a lot, so I just want to make sure I create a space or pause. John, is there anything that you wanted to add to what Michael and Nan said around this particular topic, or anything on your mind? Because you're nodding, but I got to create some space.
Yeah, thank you. No, absolutely. I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit off of what Michael said, because one of the things that I thought of as both he and Nan were talking were, you know, when you talk about civic organizations and community responsibility, you know, we have a connection at SUNY Poly with On Point for College. I saw some folks from On Point in Syracuse that were on the call today. So certainly it's a strong program. And we have, I've known students that have gone through that program and have become students here, have been successful, and you know, and stay in touch with the campus as alums afterwards. So they have interesting stories to tell. But the other part of this too is I was part of an organization, the Literacy Coalition of Herkimer counties, and that was always structured around literacy in many levels within our community in the Mohawk Valley. And it kind of, you know, phased out a little bit, but the other civic organization, the Genesis Group, is going to have an educational component to it. Again, because thinking that it takes a village, as we say, right? So the community supports education on all levels, whether it's adult literacy, financial literacy, getting ready for children ready for kindergarten. So those are all areas that I think as a community we need to look at so that they can become successful. And the more we promote education on a civic level as well, and whatever path that is, whether it's a trade or if it is a college degree, I think only improves our life as a community. Or as Alyssa said, as the city of New York. So it's statewide, but certainly I think all of our communities have to help us support those areas of education on all those different levels. And I'm glad to be a part of a group such as the Genesis Group or Literacy Coalition that are looking at that and trying to get that going within this community.
Oh, thank you, John. So I apologize that our time has come to a close. I don't know about all of you, but if we were sitting around a gigantic dinner table, having a wonderful meal together and enjoying it, I know we'd be talking long into the wee hours. So I want to thank each and every one of the panelists for their prep work, their attitudes, opinions, ideas, insights, and expertise. We're so glad you were here. It was our honor to focus on New York and dive a little bit into your state today and learn a ton about what you're all doing at your institutions. And with that, I'm going to say we are grateful. Thank you to the panelists, to all of you who attended. Again, reminder, the recording will come out via email to all of you, so you'll see it. And from all of us at Straighterline, thank you for spending an hour on some really good work in higher ed. We're grateful. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.